In this video, I shall be showing you how to turn this picture into this picture using Photoshop Elements. So we start off by loading up our Photoshop Elements and load up our source data. In this case, it's a nice picture of a young girl. And for this project, we're going to need 2 copies of that, which we do by Ctrl-J twice. And although this is a simple project, I like to name the layers. So this first one will be black and white, and this second one we will call threshold. Okay, so we're going to work on the black and white layer. So first of all, we need to hide the threshold layer. So having hidden that, and with black and white selected, we go to Enhance and down to Convert to Black and White. I've chosen the Portrait, and we just want for this project to move the contrast up to 100%. Okay, so click OK, and that's that layer finished. For this project, we're going to leave the blending mode on normal, but we're going to drop the opacity down to 60%. Having done that, we will then move on to the threshold layer, return it so we can view it, select it so that we can edit. Now we go to Filters, down to Adjustments, and then down to Threshold. Now we need to move that slider so that we can get some lightness into our hair. That should be about right there. Click OK. And again, we need to change the blending mode down to overlay. And we need to change the opacity down to around about 40%. Okay, so for the next step, we're going to need to load in a texture layer. In this case, I've already created one. In another video, I'll show you how to do that. So that's loaded. We can now use Ctrl-A to select it, and then Ctrl-C to copy it, move over to the original picture, and Ctrl-V to paste it in. We now need to change the blending mode. In this case, we're going to change it to lighten, but we're going to leave the opacity at 100%. So having done that, we need to make sure that the splashed layer has no effect on the eyes and the lips. So we're going to introduce a layer mask to this layer now. Do that at the top, just close that. And you'll notice that the mask at the moment is all white. That means that the entire splash texture layer is currently visible on the top layer. And what we need to do is to paint black over the areas of the eyes so that they become transparent and whatever is the layer below can be seen. So having selected black, we can now zoom in. We can then reduce the size of the brush using the left square bracket, and we simply paint black into the irises on both eyes to make them transparent. Don't have to be too careful with this, but the more careful you are, the better. Now move down to the lips. In order to make them easier to spot, take the threshold layer off, and then again simply paint black over where you believe the lips are. You'll notice that there's no discernible change, and that's because the layer below the threshold layer, the black and white layer, has the lips as pretty much white, so there's no change to what's happening. Put the threshold layer back on, and that's your effect. Okay, so I now want to duplicate that mask on the threshold and on the black and white layers. The way that I do this may not be the quickest and easiest, but I use Ctrl J to double the layer, and I drag the mask down. I can then remove that layer that's had its mask removed, and I repeat the process. Ctrl J, drag the mask down to the black and white layer, and then remove that top layer altogether. And we can now see the lips coming through. So that's what the picture looks like in full. What we now need to do is to do some colouring on the eyes, the eyebrows, eyeshadows, and on the lips. So we will need a new layer, and we are literally going to paint directly onto the photograph. So again, getting back to labelling, I'm going to call lips, and that one needs to be called splatter. Okay, so making sure lips is selected. Next thing to do is to choose the colour that we're going to have for her lips. In this case, I was going to go for purple, but I'm going to use red. Deep red, nice and deep. And we literally just paint over it. And because of the blending mode that we're going to use when we're finished, we don't need to worry too much about going over the edge. Obviously, the closer you get, the better. You get a better result. But in this particular instance, because we use threshold to get rid of all the greys below it, it doesn't make a great deal of difference. So we can now change the blending mode, and in this case we're going to use color. And now we just need to drop the opacity until we get a picture, a view, if you will, as we want it to look. Because we're changing the color, the light and the darks of the original picture still have an effect on the picture. Okay, so for now that will do, I think. Okay, so now we're going to do another layer. This time we're going to do the eyes, and I happen to know this particular model has very nice blue eyes. So we're going to select the blue brush, and again we're literally just painting the irises. Try and stay inside the iris, but doesn't matter if you go out. We're going to change the blending mode to color again, and again change the opacity until you get the desired effect. Okay, so the next layer, is the eyebrows. I need to move up again, and this time we're going to paint with black. Now, because the eyebrows go thick to thin, we need to change the brush size so that we're staying round about the same width of the eyebrows, and we just paint along like this, changing the size of the brush as we get closer to the end so that we get a smaller and smaller width on the brush, just like that. Same again on the other eyebrow, working our way the other way. In this case, we'll be enlarging the brush as we come towards the left-hand edge. Now in this case, we're going to change the blending mode to color burn. So we'll still get the idea of the black coming into the picture, but this time it's going to darken everything rather than just replace the color. So we're going to drop the opacity to around about 50%. So we get a dark grey rather than a black, but you can still see the shape below it. Okay, so on we go to our final layer, which is the eye shadow. I will point out I am not a makeup artist, this is just creative painting. I'm sure many more people out there can do this better than me. Yet again, we're just going to paint in the areas where we want the colour to be. Try and keep it looking fairly natural. We're going to start off at the point there and try and give it a curve up to the eyebrow and then along the eyelid. You'll notice I'm using a solid brush rather than a soft brush. I should say a hard brush rather than a soft brush. And that's to try and minimize the amount of, well, the lack of coverage that you get when you paint. If I go outside, then it doesn't really matter. We can go over with the rubber and we can remove it. Now you'll notice that the rubber does have a soft edge, so that's not particularly good. But again, that's not a problem. We can go back to the brush and just paint black in the magenta in. Try and keep a curve. There we go. Right. And then we repeat the exercise over here. And the eyelid, where the eyelid should be. That's it. Finish off up at the eyebrow and colour in. I've been lazy and I've left it on a small brush, but sure, sensibly a larger brush would do this quicker and easier. Okay, so blending mode. We're going to use color burn again. Zoom out so you can see the whole picture, and then change to color burn. We're using color burn so that if you have gone into the eyebrows or onto the eyelids, then it will hide it much easier. And we're going to drop the opacity down to around about 50% again, just to soften it up. Zoom back in, have a look, and you'll notice that because I used a small brush, the coverage isn't particularly good, but that's okay. We can use the brush again and just paint over it again. It will remember the overlay and the opacity. Just tidying it up to make that painted area look more uniform. There we go. So that's the finished article. There is just one last little step for me to do, and that's that I don't particularly like the large empty area at the top left hand corner, and there's a big white streak down the left hand edge. So I'm now going to choose to take this into a square crop, drag the grid down, and that's got rid of a lot of that dark area at the top, but the white area is still showing. I don't particularly want to take any area off the top because there isn't a lot of space between the top of the head and the top of the picture. So I'll grab the bottom left hand corner and I'll move that upwards and inwards until that white area is gone, and then just click tick. Control 0 to maximize the size, and that's the finished picture. Well, that's the end of this tutorial, part 1 of creative portraits using Elements and Affinity. Part 2 will be creating exactly the same image, very similar methodology, but using Affinity software instead of Adobe software. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and we'll come back and watch part 2. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you around. Thank you. Now we simply go to